Welcome students of economic learning to video 4 on the production possibilities model. Students who have not consumed the first 3 video installments of production possibility lessons should do so prior to watching this video. Quick review, production possibility model has 4 economic lessons associated with this. We covered these ideas on the previous videos. Good to reiterate the importance of the model. The lessons from the production possibilities model include number 1, for a specific time under consideration, an economy will have an absolute limitation to its economic output, limitation to production. That is because scarce resources, land, capital, labor, the skills of the entrepreneur are scarce relative to human wants. This identifies with the very heart and soul of the definition of economics. Because of lesson number 1, limitations of production for a specific time under consideration, choices, trade-offs, and costs. To get more of X, we have to give up some of Y. We can't have more of one type of output without giving up some type of another output. The model helps us quantify this idea and graphically observe the idea of choices, trade-offs, and costs. 3 types of efficiency associated with the model. Our third economic lesson are the 3 types of economic efficiency: full employment, using all of your available resources; productive efficiency, producing goods and services using the least cost method of production; and then allocative efficiency, the mix of output, the combination of capital goods and consumer goods that maximizes society's happiness. All of this is review. The specifics of this video will examine goal number 4. That is, how could a nation generate economic growth in the future, escape the limitations of its current domestic production possibilities frontier. Remember, every production possibility frontier is built on 4 assumptions. If we are operating along the curve, if society is producing at some point along the production possibility frontier, we can automatically assume that number 1, full employment, and number 2, productive efficiency, our first assumption, is being met. That is to say, anywhere along the curve, society is using all of its available resources and producing goods and services using the least cost method of production. Now, because of assumption number 2 and assumption number 3, we would never be able to escape the limitations of our domestic production possibility frontier. The curve, the frontier, represents the best we can do for the time being. For the time being, we have fixed resources both in quantity and in quality. And for the time being, we have fixed technology, one best methodology of producing goods and services. There will be a possibility of relaxing both of these assumptions, and that's how we will generate economic growth. In other words, more or better resources, or an improvement in productivity / technology. The 4th assumption is pretty basic. We've gone over this a few times. The production possibility frontier maps out the trade-off between 2 types of production. Broadly speaking, we graphed consumer goods on the horizontal axis and capital goods on the vertical axis. So 2 various types of production. Because of limited or scarce resources, society for the time being would never be able to produce beyond its blue production possibility curve, beyond its blue production possibility frontier. The frontier represents the best we can do for the time being with our limited resources in quantity and quality and our fixed technology. Remember, any point inside the curve is attainable but inefficient because not using all of our available resources. We identified economic growth as one of the 8 important goals for any economy. So, to improve standards of living, to improve the livelihoods of human beings living in a nation, to lessen the burden of scarcity, society must find ways to generate economic growth, to shift the production possibility curve from its current limitations to the right. This is represented in our graph here as a shift of the curve A, B, C, D, E, our existing production possibility frontier, to A prime, B prime, C prime, D prime, and E prime. What, my friends, would generate such economic growth? What factors, what economic events could increase potential output for the nation and therefore lessen the burden of scarcity and improve living standards? Generally speaking, we identify 2 sources of economic growth. Number one, an increase in the quantity or quality of resources. And number two, increases in technology / productivity. As you can see on this particular slide, roughly 1/3 or 33% of all growth, economic growth, is generated through increases in inputs, increases in the quality or quantity of factors of production. 2/3 of economic growth is generated through improvements in technology. Therefore, technological advancement or productivity is far more important to our economic future as far as generating growth for the economy. Let's discuss these ideas in a bit more detail. In addition to just identifying our two sources of economic growth, number one, increases in the quantity or quality of resources, and number two, improvements in technology / productivity, let's discuss some real life examples of our sources of economic growth. Over the past 20 years, the United States has enjoyed a renaissance in energy production. Directional drilling and fracking has exponentially increased the output of natural gas production and oil production in the US of A. The United States is now the world's largest producer of oil, and we are literally drowning in natural gas. This huge explosion, no pun intended, in the availability of these land resources has generated tremendous economic growth for the United States over the past 2 years. Remember, economics is a social science. These are domestic sources of energy production. Domestic sources of energy production mean we are less dependent on other nations for our energy production and consumption, which is a benefit when you talk about this socioeconomic relationship between the USA and other countries. Beyond land resource increases, we could increase the human resource. Why does policy matter when you discuss something such as education? Governments take measures to improve the standing of and services of public schools across the United States. Likewise, we encourage students to take up difficult majors such as science, math, and engineering. These type of improvements in the educational system improve the quality of the human resource, labor, and therefore also generate economic growth. 2/3 of all economic growth is generated through increases in technology / productivity. If technological advancement or increases in productivity are responsible for 2/3 of or 60% of economic growth, important for us to analyze this source of economic growth in more detail. Remember, economic growth is one of the 8 economic goals every society attempts to achieve. Economic growth is important because it lessens the burden of scarcity and it improves living standards. Any increases in technology / productivity, which allow businesses, which allow companies, which allow the firm to increase output by adopting a new methodology of production, will generate economic growth. So productivity is simply a measure of output, number of units produced per unit of input, and by per unit of input we mean per unit of land, capital, or labor resource input. Productivity growth drives efficiency, getting more out of the same or even getting more out of less of the input of a resource. Current technologies under investigation which will generate economic growth moving forward. One is the green energy movement. Solar panels have increased in their efficiency quite substantially over the past 10 to 20 years. We will see continued improvements in the efficiency of sun absorption and energy production relative to solar energy. Wind energy has also enjoyed some improvement in its distribution of energy. Geothermal energy will be another source of technological advancement which will reshape the way energy is produced and consumed across the country. Not only do these technological advancements improve the production and distribution of energy, they address other social and political and economic worries such as pollution. So there's a, remember, connection between economics being a social science and the lessons we learn as far as economic growth generated through increases in productivity / technology. Even bad, horrific events such as the pandemic have the potential to create economic improvements. If we observe changes in the healthcare industry that were forced upon society because of the global pandemic and the COVID-19 virus capturing the attention of our entire planet and causing great suffering, it also forced hospitals and healthcare providers to reevaluate the service being produced. In other words, if it is possible to monitor an individual through a telemetry unit tied to a modem in their house, it reduces the cost of production and allows one doctor to monitor the health and well-being of more than just the patients in the inpatient facility or the hospital. So constantly businesses, industries, economists, engineers evaluating society, the production process, looking for technological advancements or means to improve productivity to generate economic growth. Let's review the basic principles of our production possibility frontier. The blue curve represents potential economic output for this country, for this nation for the time being. Given fixed resources in quantity and quality and fixed technology, this country would never be able to escape the limitations of its blue production possibility frontier. The curve represents potential economic output for the time being because resources are fixed in quantity and quality, and technology is also fixed. Any point inside a curve would be attainable but inefficient. Attainable because it's a mix of output which is possible production, but not efficient because society is not putting to use all of its available resources. As long as the society is achieving full employment, it will produce somewhere along its curve. Economic growth is possible if society increases the quantity of resources or quality of resources, or improves technology / productivity. However, economists ask an important question about allocative efficiency today and the potential for economic growth moving forward. Theoretically, a society can choose any point along its existing production possibility frontier as allocatively efficient. So if we focus our attention on our original production possibility frontier, marked A, B, C, D, and E, those points represent some combination of capital good and consumer good production and consumption. The question is, does a nation's allocatively efficient choice today have implications for economic growth moving forward? Let's evaluate 2 points on the curve. Point B as in boy and point D as in dog. Look at the combination of capital goods and consumer goods taking place at B versus D. At B, society has decided to allocate more resources towards the production of industrial robots, capital goods, and fewer resources towards the production of pizzas, consumer goods. At D, the opposite is taking place. Society is allocating more of its land, capital, and labor towards the production of consumer goods and fewer economic resources to the production of capital goods. Economic theory suggests that a nation who is willing to forego some present consumption and allocate more resources towards capital goods production at the time being should generate better economic growth moving forward. Remember, capital goods satisfy economic wants indirectly and over time, while consumer goods satisfy economic wants directly and immediately. Let's reinforce the important idea introduced on the previous slide by evaluating 2 countries side by side. For simplicity, we have labeled the country on the left country A and the country on the right country B. Notice the green production possibility frontier for both country A and country B represents potential economic output for the time being. Also take notice of both countries' choice for allocative efficiency, mix of output on their current production possibility frontier. The horizontal axis is labeled goods for the present, aka consumer goods. The vertical axis is labeled goods for the future, capital goods. Remember, consumer goods satisfy economic wants directly and immediately. Capital goods satisfy economic wants indirectly and over time. What do you notice when you evaluate the choice of country A versus country B in terms of mix of economic output today? And then the question becomes, what will be the implications for economic growth moving forward? Before we answer that question, we do need to make an important assumption. Both countries have access to the same level of resources. Both countries operate under the same political conditions, and both countries have the same level of economic freedom. In other words, they're both playing by the same rules of engagement when it comes to their economies. Notice that country A has decided that a mix of output closer to goods for the present, consumer goods, maximizes society's happiness. They have decided that the marginal benefit of that level of production and consumption of consumer goods equals the marginal cost of how resources could have been used otherwise. Country B has chosen a different output. Country B's allocatively efficient point is much closer to capital good production. In theory, economists would assume that country B would be able to and should generate better economic growth moving forward because of its allocatively efficient choice today. In other words, country B has decided they will forego some level of present consumption by shifting more resources and more production into future consumption. They will forego some consumer goods to increase capital good production at the time being, and that will theoretically generate better economic growth moving forward. Other things equal, ceteris paribus, we will assume that country B will generate better economic growth than its neighbor, country A, based on its allocatively efficient choice of production and consumption today. This concludes the fourth video in our series on the production possibility frontier. Look for you on the fifth video about the production possibilities model.